How does Mike Leach celebrate a win like that? What are you going to be doing tonight to celebrate a big victory for you in this program?
I'm going to get on a bus, and I'm going to ride for 4 hours to Starkville, Mississippi. Now,
I mean, it wasn't pretty, but when that ball went through the uprights, it was one of the prettiest things I'd ever seen. We just beat LSU on the road. Go Hogs.
Yeah, great team win for us. Always good to keep the Mayor's Cup where it belongs in the city of Columbia. You like that? Could have gone to either Columbia.
10-0, undefeated in the SEC. That's where we've gotten. It makes no guarantee for what's going to happen in the future. We got a lot of guys that we've got to try to get better and improve, and we got to tackle better. There's a lot of things we can work on to get better. And you know what I love is the being in that locker room over there beside me. They all know that, and nobody thinks they've arrived. There's things we can work on and get better at, and they'll continue to do it. But
welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter, and I'm joined as always by my cousin Shane, who goes by Big Orange Vols on Twitter. What are you up to, you big Tennessee homer?
Hey, babe, what's going on?
Oh, man, let me tell you. Spring is done in the SEC, and I could tell by the content we have on this show. But I can't, Shane. I can't.
Yeah, I don't have any more dog stories. They were great today, Mike. So you're going to have to fill this one in.
Yeah, so we got the NFL draft coming up, of course, on Thursday. So I got a little nugget here. I thought this was pretty interesting. We got a fan question. I thought this was a great one. And then I reached out to a new friend here, Shane, Stefan Krajisnik. He covers Mississippi State Bulldogs for the Clarion Ledger. So this is going to be a quality show here, buddy. But before we get rolling, what'd you think? Did you see this clip? Let's play it here on YouTube. Play it for the audience. Old Darius Rucker. I don't think he's got too many friends on Rocky Top right now.
Fuck Tennessee.
So how about it, Shane? I mean, he's played up to the crowd. I give him credit for it, but we always kid. You ain't gonna be seeing this type of stuff in the Pac-12 country. I mean, even these musicians, man, they play up to the SEC crowds. You know what?
Yeah, since Hootie, I've never really been a Rucker fan, especially since he's all in on South Carolina. It's just, after knowing that, it's funny because I enjoyed his music, and then I'll never forget finding out that he was a diehard South Carolina Gamecock fan. And when I did, it was so funny, man. I was just like, I never really liked his music now that I think about it. Because it's true. It's funny because that's how deep college football is for us fans. It's like, we'll be your best friend, but then sometimes we'll find out you support a certain coach or a certain team, and you're just like, well, maybe we're not friends. Maybe we're just coworkers after all. So, no, I obviously that came out. He's got to play to the fans. But one thing about Rucker I do like is he's not like a Kenny Chesney, Right. He's not running around and talking about, I don't know, maybe I've never been to other states and other concerts, but I will say it seems like he's pretty diehard South Carolina, and I admire that in country music.
Yeah, without a doubt, Shane. Well, like I said, we got a question here, fan question, and hey, we're going to rely on you guys more and more the next couple of weeks before we get into media days and everything like that. So if you got a question for us, just shoot it to us. You can hit us up on Gmail, thatsecpodcast@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter like Mr. Justin Rodriguez did, Shane. He's got a question for us. With Arkansas playing a minimum of 6 ranked teams this season, if the Razorbacks were to lose to only Alabama, does that resume make them a playoff contender? Hashtag bold predictions there from old Justin. But, yeah, let's go down the schedule real quick here, Shane, maybe to give, in case you don't got it in front of you and everything. But Arkansas.
We're in full off-season form here, because I'm curious about that with Georgia. Like if we beat Alabama but lose to Georgia, do we make the playoffs? So, all right. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see what you got here, Mike. Let's get that schedule pulled up.
Yeah, so the home opener, of course, Cincinnati. It's a game we've talked all about. Cincinnati just went to the college football playoff. That's going to be a tough opener there for the Razorbacks. Week 2.
But winnable.
Very winnable. Week 2, hosting a South Carolina Gamecock team coming off a 7-win season, a bowl win season that's added via the transfer portal.
I would like to do something here, Mike. Before you get too far into this thing, let's just put our optimistic hat on, because obviously when I saw this, I immediately chuckled a little bit inside. But again, as a true fan, you can kind of create some of these. I mean, it could happen. It really could happen. So as we're going down the schedule, let's put our optimistic hat on and let's get Arkansas to a college football playoff, okay? So Cincinnati, they come out, they beat them because obviously their best player left last year in the draft, which is coming up. South Carolina, finding themselves. I'll let you continue from there.
And then Missouri State, coached by Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, easy Vic.
Should beat them by about 50.
Texas
A&M.
It's interesting.
Texas A&M, of course, a neutral field there in Arlington. You beat snap at streak last year, beat the Aggies. Gonna have to do it 2 years in a row, I would think, which I think could be in the cards. Certainly not a lock, but you know that's a coin flip type game. Now here's the game he was referencing here. Alabama, they do come to Razorback Stadium. They went toe to toe with the Crimson Tide last season in Tuscaloosa, so he's saying he's conceding that they'll drop that one. But now again here, it doesn't get much easier, Shane, at Mississippi State. Them cowbells clanging. That this has been a tough game. Of course, Arkansas's won it the last 2 years, but it's been tight both seasons there under Sam Pittman and Mike Leach. That's not going to be a gimme. And then at BYU, which who the hell knows what you're getting with BYU. 1 year they're undefeated. The next year they're winning 6 ball games, but they're full of 27-year-old men out there because of their missions and all that. So I guess it all just depends on who's on the mission, who's back from the mission. You know, was there a quarterback involved in that deal? I don't know, but
it's probably an early game. Get them old guys out there. You know, they don't like them night games. They probably don't even have lights in BYU just for that reason.
Then you got 2 weeks to prepare for a road trip at Auburn. Of course, Auburn beat you last year and beat you at home. So that's not one you can overlook if you're a Razorback fan. Liberty, Hugh Freeze's Liberty comes to town. Of course, they're losing their quarterback, so who knows how good Liberty's going to be. LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and you finish up at Missouri. Again, I'm not seeing any games there that you say Arkansas's got no shot to win. And hell, I'm even including the Alabama game.
Right.
So,
boy, that is interesting. We were tagged in something earlier this week talking about the toughest 3-game stretch, and I'm looking at Arkansas' schedule, and yes, they've got that juggernaut right there at Texas A&M, Alabama, then Mississippi State. I think that's the toughest 3-game stretch that any team's going to face right now. But the fact you got Alabama at home, the fact you got A&M technically at a neutral field, a little bit more of a away game, but, you know, who knows? Jimmy likes them Razorbacks. Maybe he'll do something down there for him, you know? So, but I just – did I say Jimmy? Yeah. Yeah, sorry, man. It's getting late. Jerry, I mean. But what I'm getting at here, Mike, if you win one of those games, I know he talked about Alabama, but, you know, I'm a firm believer Texas A&M's got a real shot to win the SEC championship here. If you come out and you lose to one of those teams, just one, which is last year, you think about it. They played Alabama tough, Texas A&M they beat. It's very feasible that this happens again. And if it does, they lose to one of those teams. I like the back half of that schedule, brother. I mean, I don't think I've really sat down and looked at what Arkansas's got, man. I mean, you get past them, those juggernauts, October 8th, man, you're in cruise control, and you control your own destiny. So, man, am I sleeping on them Razorbacks?
Well, but going back to Justin's question, though, what he's really asking, can the Razorbacks punch their ticket to a college football playoff if they go 11-1?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can. I think it's happening.
Here's the path to it, Shane. Alabama has got to probably go undefeated.
Yeah.
They've got to win the SEC. They've got to look pretty good like Georgia was last year. Hell, like Alabama was the year before, like LSU the year prior. So if you're going to drop a game, it's got to be to a playoff team, no doubt. I think you're going to need South Carolina to be very good this year because you want that on your resume. You're going to need Texas A&M, which is not a leap to say. Maybe a 10-2 Texas A&M because you need some marquee wins on here. And hell, you probably need BYU and Liberty to be solid too, because you talk about this back half of the schedule. It suits up well for them, but Auburn, expectations not that high. LSU, year one under Brian Kelly. Some of those fans think the Tigers are going to be great. We'll see. Ole Miss, what are they going to look like when they're rebuilding? Missouri. I mean, that would be the point on your calendar in November when you have got to have impressive resume wins, and I don't know if I'm seeing it here. So that's why I think you need South Carolina and A&M and Alabama. You need them to have outstanding seasons.
So much for optimism, Mike. Here I'm looking at the Razorbacks, and I'm saying, okay, yeah, they're catching Mississippi State at the right time. I think Mississippi State's going to be a top 25 team when they meet because that's right before Kentucky and Alabama. So they may have their first loss with Texas A&M, but they're going to be sitting pretty. I would say they'd be a top 20 team, or maybe even top 15 by that point. Who knows? I'm high on Mississippi State Bulldogs, and if Arkansas can put together a couple of wins after A&M, you got to remember they have to beat A&M or they have to beat Alabama. So we're going to make the same argument with a one-loss A&M or a one-loss Alabama to make it to college football playoffs. Why wouldn't you make the same argument with an Arkansas Razorback that went through the West with only one loss, and that was to an SEC West champion? So I don't know, man. I'm looking at this schedule. I think what you really need, LSU and Ole Miss to kind of get sexy by the end of the year, so you can make one of those marquee games. But the fact is, you've got them both at home. So I don't know, man.
Now let me tell you though, Shane, why I'm not a big fan of this question. I love it. We probably shouldn't bash him because he's helping the show out here, Justin. He says he's a big fan of the show.
Yeah, you're getting him to unsubscribe right now. Keep it up, Mike. Just keep going. No, I'm just kidding.
But you cannot look at the schedule and say, all right, we'll automatically lose to Bama, but are we a playoff team? That's not the way they're thinking in College Station. You know what they thought going in? I know last year did not go as they wanted, but they circled that game and said, we're going to be nationally televised CBS. Alabama's coming to town. Let's whoop their ass. And guess what?
Right.
They did it. Now, again, they fell short in many other games that they shouldn't have. But if you're Arkansas, hell, I just put you number 3 in my power rankings. You got mighty Alabama. I know that they've beaten them like 14 years in a row. I get that. But you just got to snap these streaks, brother. And you can't be looking at Alabama like they're some invincible juggernaut because they can get beat. Hell, they got beat twice last year. So if I'm Justin, I'm sitting here saying, why can't we snap this streak? Let's dethrone Alabama. Let's beat their ass in Razorback Stadium. That's a tough place to play. Let's hope it's a night game when Alabama comes to town. Give you all day long to liquor up and get ready for this ball game and dethrone the Crimson Tide. That's the way I'd be looking at it. And if you beat Alabama, there's an outstanding chance you're punching your ticket if you take care of business the rest of the season to the college football playoff.
What's their odds right now? Is there any odds out on Arkansas?
No, I've not seen any odds for any teams really other than, there's odds to win the national championship for a handful of teams, but I don't have those in front of me.
Let me ask you, since I'm playing devil's advocate here. Mike, got $100. You're in Vegas. They're giving you some odds that the Arkansas Razorbacks are going to not win an Natty, not win an SEC, just make it to the college football playoffs. Out of that $100, how committed are you that they're going to be there?
Probably 20.
All right. I mean, you'll take it, right? I mean, I'd take that. If you told me Tennessee Volunteers got a 20% shot to make the college football playoffs, I'm in. But looking at the schedule, I got two teams circled: Texas A&M, Alabama. That's what it comes down to. We got to win one of them, and we got a shot to get to those college football playoffs. So that's just me, man. I'm drinking that orange. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, boys.
Hey, now, last thing, Shay, before we get to our interview real quick. Again, I really appreciate the question, Justin. Anybody else got questions, fire them our way. Give us something to talk about here. But Braden Gall, friend of the show, owner of 440 Sports, and he's host of the Athlon Cover 2 podcast. He put out these stats, Shay. Just want to run them by you real quick. With the NFL draft coming, obviously on Thursday, total draft picks in the SEC since 2010. So that's a nice round number here. The last, what would it be, 12 drafts here. Alabama, no surprise, leads the way with 101 draft picks. I think you've already seen this, but do you know who number 2 is?
I'm looking at it. So
okay.
I know. Yeah. I'm going to guess LSU.
Exactly. LSU, 81, not too far off the pace here. But I thought this was the biggest surprise to me, Shane. No disrespect. We know this is a great program. They've won several national championships. Florida Gators, 75.
Yeah.
And that gives you an indication, Shane, even when things are not going, I know we had some good years under Dan Mullen. We're ready for the Billy Napier era. But even when you're not producing at a championship level like you want to the vast majority of the years, you're still number 3 in the SEC in producing NFL talent.
You better get that dog under control. Throw him some Zaxby's.
Number 4 on the list, again, this is a little surprising, Shane. You think it'd be a little bit higher, but Georgia Bulldogs, 68 total picks. Now that's going to skyrocket here on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I mean, they'll probably be passing up Florida. Hell, they may even pass it. Well, they're not going to pass LSU but they'll become a lot closer to LSU. And then how about this one, Shane? Auburn Tigers, 44. NFL Factory there on the plane. Shouldn't be too surprised. Auburn's always competitive. Texas A&M, 40.
Yeah.
South Carolina, 38, as well as Mississippi State, 38. Arkansas, 37. And then we got 3 teams tied at 29, Shane. Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss. That's pretty surprising that Tennessee's that low, I bet, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because if you grew up in the 90s and 80s, you're used to Tennessee putting a lot of talent in the NFL, and you look at, in years, I mean, you can Google how many players and universities have put people into the NFL, and Tennessee's one of the top 10, but here, I mean, they're quickly coming down the list.
And credit South Carolina, Mississippi State, each at 38. I mean, those are great numbers for those 2 schools. And
Absolutely.
Then last but not least, this has got to change. Kentucky, of course, I'm not putting this all on Mark Stoops or anything, but 24 draft picks, 13th, and then Vanderbilt, 16th. So, again, Kentucky, those numbers will be going up in this draft, but just figured the fans would appreciate to see kind of where those standings are now. And I'll recap this on Friday, Shane. On Monday would be a better way to do it. And I bet these numbers change a little bit, don't you think?
Absolutely. And looking at this list, because I just didn't know. Looking at it, I mean, you can get onto our on our Twitter account and you can see these numbers that Mike's talking about. I guess the biggest takeaways for me was the LSU Florida. Why don't we have more championships? I mean, I know LSU put 14 in the league a few years back and broke the record, got a natty. That was great, but they're still 20 away from Alabama. And you would figure that they would have made some more noise by now. Same thing with the Florida Gators. They shouldn't be going through all these coaches but putting all this talent in the league. So I think these fans are very hungry that they finally found a coach, hopefully, and that they can lead them to the promised land. Because if they can keep this kind of talent coming in to Gainesville, brother, they're going to be hanging banners. So that's a couple takeaways I'm having. Another one is Kentucky down there at the bottom. Just what they've put together here the last 4 or 5 seasons has been impressive. You look over there beside it, they've got 3 in the first round, and that's recent. You know what I'm saying? So you talk
Right.
about a trajectory that's immediately going up, but you think of the success that they've had up there in Lexington, and only putting 24 in 12 years. That's an average of 2 a year. They're still able to be competitive. You know, they've not been able to win the East, but they've been, you know, many times the second best team in the East. So I don't know. Those are just a couple of takeaways I've got from these numbers. And like you said, come Thursday and Friday, these numbers are going to change probably pretty drastically, because there's going to be a lot coming out of the SEC. I expect another record broken.
All right, Shane. So let's kick it over now to our interview with Stefan Krajisnik from the Clarion Ledger.
Say that 10 times fast.
No, he told me how to say it. I still butchered it. I'm probably going to have to fix this in editing. You know what?
Thank God Bob Kessling ain't here.
All right, hey, we're pleased for the first time to be joined by Stefan Krajisnik, who covers Mississippi State for the Clarion Ledgers. And you know that name well if you're in that state. Stefan just started up with the Clarion Ledger, but he's been covering Mississippi State athletics for a while now. Stefan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Looking forward to talking some football. It feels like it's so far away, but it's creeping up on us.
Yeah, no doubt. And you know, I wanted to ask you because I'm sure you're well aware of this. From what I read up on you, you're an Indiana grad, and for whatever reason, Indiana is like the pipeline to SEC reporters here. So you probably knew what you were getting yourself into when you came down to Starkville to cover the Bulldogs. But did you realize how big this Mississippi State Ole Miss rivalry was going to be till you got down here?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm sure you've spoken to Ben Portnoy before, and he covers South Carolina now, and he kind of had a job here with the Commercial Dispatch covering Mississippi State. So he was kind of the point man on making sure I knew all things coming in, and you know, you can imagine I've experienced rivalries and stuff. The Indiana Purdue basketball rivalry is huge every year. And I figured the Ole Miss Mississippi State football rivalry was huge just because, you know, the Egg Bowl being usually on Thanksgiving has given a great platform for that rivalry to kind of shine like all over the country, because it's the only college football game on. So like, you know, growing up even in Indiana, you know, I was tuned into the Egg Bowl because what else would you watch unless you were, you know, super avid NFL fan, you know, watching that night. And with, at least for my lifetime, the Cowboys are usually in that late spot, and nobody really wants to watch that anyway. So, but it was really awesome this past weekend to watch the baseball rivalry. You know, you figure rivals, you know, it can be any sport, and Mississippi State fans want to beat Ole Miss, but I really never understood the magnitude of how big college baseball was in the SEC until I got here, and then obviously, you know, this particular rivalry, it's huge. Like people care a lot, and I've never seen college baseball to that, you know, on that platform before. So that was really cool to see. And, you know, I know people bicker back and forth in the rivalry, but I think at the end of the day, I think there's a great deal of respect, you know, between the two schools when it comes to the competitive nature and what, you know, they've, you know, both sides have kind of been capable of making, you know, these rivalries become.
Yeah, and not only are you know, thrown right into the middle of this rivalry, you're thrown into covering one of the most unique characters, not only in college football, but really in all sports. What's it like covering Mike Leach on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I always tell people that the day-to-day stuff is not, you know, a lot like what you see on the viral clips. You know, there's a lot of times where, you know, he probably doesn't feel like doing a media availability or doesn't feel like answering a question or things of that nature. But he's a good time to work with. And you know, at the end of the day, when he steps off the podium or whatnot, you're going to get, you know, a decent amount of time to just talk to him on the side about literally anything you want to talk about. I mean, he's a funny guy, and you know, that like any coach, you know, the relationship with reporters is what it is. There's days where, you know, coaches don't feel like doing press conferences and days they do, but overall it's been a fun experience. I've enjoyed covering him. I've gotten a chance to, you know, talk to him about non-football related stuff that it's really interesting. And I've always told everyone, you know, his viral clips about candy corn and his thoughts on weddings and things like that. Like those are the clips that get millions of views, and people laugh at that and think he's, you know, just some funny guy. But he's a really smart guy, and he's really fun to talk about. You know, he's traveled everywhere, and it's really cool to talk about that. And you know, he graduated from law school. Like he's a really smart guy who knows a lot of things. And that's, you know, what I've always found more interesting and more entertaining than those, viral moments and funny things that he says, though, those rants are pretty iconic in their own way.
Now, let me ask you this, because circling to his football team, Mississippi State, you think they're being a little bit slept on because obviously had they had a better kicker, I mean, they may have been a 10-win team last season. Coming into this year, they're going to host Texas A&M, which they beat, Arkansas, which questionable call, could have beat them, and you're also hosting Auburn. So just looking at the schedule, looking at the team they're bringing back, I have a high opinion on Mississippi State, but do you think nationally the Bulldogs are being slept on a little bit?
I think so. And I think it really did surprise me seeing a lot of first you have the way too soon rankings that come out the day after the championship game, which is, to me, is kind of irrelevant at this point with how the transfer portal is, right? Like there's just no way to predict anything. But on top of that, even as the rankings have kind of, progressed, it is surprising to not see Mississippi State in a lot of those top 25s. And I'm not saying that, they're necessarily a top 10 team going into the season, but I definitely thought they were going to be a top 25 team in most accounts because of what they return. And obviously losing Mekhi Polk and Charles Cross and Martin Emerson, those are big losses. But I feel like aside from left tackle will be a little bit, iffy, especially when you're trying to replace a guy who's probably going to go in the top 10 on Thursday, right? But Mekhi Polk, I think they're not going to have too much trouble replacing just because of the depth that they have at wide receiver, as any Mike Leach air raid offense tends to do. And with Emmanuel Forbes there, you kind of have him to just step into that number one corner role. And they've got a few guys who are capable of being that number two guy. So their biggest losses, I feel like they have replacements for. So you look at what they return and what they're capable of replacing. I think it's a pretty good team. What's tough for them is the schedule that they get handed. You mentioned those 3 games that they have at home, which are very winnable. But at the same time, you get to play Georgia this year in that cross divisional game, right? Like you went from playing Vanderbilt last year, you're playing Georgia this year, so that's kind of unfavorable. And they're playing at Kentucky, and I've seen various reports. Andy Costa, who was at the Clarion Ledger before, I took the job recently, reported that by some accounts they have the toughest schedule in the nation coming into next season. Now, obviously that changes, with the portal and things like that. But overall, you can see how hard it is. It's not too much of a surprise that someone in the SEC West has that. But when you take the SEC West and you add Georgia, you're going to have the hardest schedule. That's just how it's going to work out. And they got to take advantage of the non-conference games. They got to put themselves in a good position. They didn't do that last year, particularly with that loss at Memphis. And everyone remembers that controversial punt return and all that. But at the end of the day, that's probably a game they should have ran away with. You can't really mess around in the non-conference. You got to get your feet wet right away, solidify that offensive line. So like any team, they've got holes. But to go back to your question, I do think they're being slept on a little bit because I think they can be one of the better teams in the SEC West.
Now, is there a question mark, maybe the biggest question mark that you had for this football team going into spring camp that you think they got answered? Is it that left tackle position? Is it another one? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the one that did the best job of addressing and I guess, clearing any doubt of is replacing Mekhi Polk. They've had Caleb Duckin, who's going to be a redshirt senior and really, hasn't shown that production, but he's got the size. And if he can just be consistent, he can be really good and kind of step into that role. But alongside, what we've seen in history with Mike Leach offenses is there's rarely that Mekhi Polk. There's usually a plethora of guys who come in and add up to those 105 receptions. You don't have one guy who's just going to go get those receptions. And I think they're in a better position for that this year. I think their wide receiver group is just, less top heavy. I think it's a pretty spread out group where you can have a few guys. And if you're demanding, Caleb Duckin to go out there and get you 50 and 60 catches, that's reasonable. Again, asking him to get 105 might not be reasonable. I think when you spread that out, they did a good job of addressing, that question of Mekhi Polk leaving. The left tackle spot, they've tried Ketrevius Johnson, people call him Dollar Bill around here, a left tackle. He was mostly a right guard most of the last season. So moving him at left tackle is interesting. They bring in Percy Lewis, a JUCO guy who I believe was the number 2 JUCO player available in this year's signing class. He's a really highly rated guy, huge guy. Like you look at him, you're like, well, yeah, that's who you want at left tackle. But he's obviously still making that transition in spring of becoming an SEC ready guy coming in from JUCO. So, left tackle will be interesting, but I think this spring they've done a great job of addressing at least that outside wide receiver room.
Now, Mississippi State's also had a couple spring scrimmages that they've opened to the public. I know the the quote unquote spring game was supposed to be that way, but the weather didn't cooperate. Any intel or observations that you've gathered from the open scrimmages that Mississippi State's had this spring?
Yeah. So the way they've structured it is they've had 3 open scrimmages. And they weren't having a traditional spring game this year. They tried not to even call it that. They were just kind of calling it a spring scrimmage. So the one that got rained out, they had the week before the original scheduled one, they just had a typical Saturday scrimmage that was open to the public. The following week it gets rained out, so they just moved that to Tuesday. So they had a Tuesday scrimmage, and they're going to have one on tonight, Tuesday night, for kind of their last practice / last scrimmage. So that's the way they've structured it, with practices kind of coming in between those. The one thing that I've really taken away from it is they have a really deep front 6 defensively, and we haven't seen a lot of that in the spring, just because guys like Jordan Davis is still coming back from a torn ACL. We didn't see him at all last season, and that's a guy that people thought would be Mississippi State's top defensive end. Guys like Jaden Crumity have been kind of limited in the spring. Jed Johnson fractured his hand and has been out most of the spring. That's going to be a starting linebacker. But with all those injuries, they had a few young guys like Deshaun Page at linebacker who have really stepped up and looked good in those scrimmages. So suddenly you think, well, when they get those big guys back, in the fall, they've got a pretty deep front 6, and that was their strength last season, because and I think it still will be, because safety is still an iffy position that Mississippi State was among the best defenses when it came to stopping the run, and that helped their secondary out a lot. And maybe some of those holes in the safety position didn't show because of how good they were up front. So if they have a deep room there and they can just rotate guys in and get fresh guys in, there's no reason to believe that at least top rush defense can't return and help the pass defense out a little bit, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's so much star power at the quarterback position in the SEC returning. Well, of course, we got the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. We got other guys that are listed all over the preseason Heisman Trophy odds. So it may be a stretch to say Will Rogers is the best quarterback just because of how loaded they are at that position in the conference. But, what are the odds that he's the most productive? I don't think that's a stretch at all, considering what we've seen from him and what we know. We all know the prolific offenses Mike Leach puts together. What are the odds that Will Rogers is the most productive, and you can define that however you want, most productive quarterback in the SEC this year?
I think the odds on that are pretty good. And, you mentioned there the Heisman odds. When I checked, and this was like January, like right after the season had ended, they had like the way too early, Heisman odds, or the immediate Heisman odds. I think it was FanDuel that had him. And Will Rogers was 9th. So I think there's definitely some national hype around him. And I think what we've seen, or at least what we saw last season, was he went from a guy in the first half of the year who was putting up ridiculous numbers because of the Mike Leach offense. He was throwing it a ton. He was completing a ton of passes. A lot of them were just, kind of dump offs and, that chunk yardage that they get in the air raid offense. It wasn't necessarily big plays downfield, but he was getting a ton of yards, completing passes, getting touchdowns. His numbers looked really good, but you still felt like there was a next step to his game. And I think we really saw that as the season progressed. Like he struggled in the Egg Bowl, and he struggled a lot in the Liberty Bowl. But in those games leading up to that, like the people that watched that Auburn game and saw the flip that Mississippi State made from being down 23 to, like people are surprised that, they came back and they won that game, and it was this huge comeback. But I don't know the last time I've, at least in person, seen a quarterback take over the game, like that. Like we've seen great performances. Like, Bryce Young has taken over games, right? Like we've seen that. But for me to watch it live and to just like, it wasn't like you get teams that come back and then you get that like final drive. It's huge. Like Mississippi State was down like 28-17, and you're like, they're going to win this game just because of how dominant like Will Rogers looked. Like he was just slicing up that defense. He was finding every hole in that defense, finding the space, finding the grass that you need in the air raid. And you saw, that was just a perfect game of seeing how he's learned this offense in his time working with Mike Leach. And you really saw him going from a system quarterback to a guy who knows how to run that system. Like it wasn't the system suiting him. It was him, kind of knowing what to do and Mike Leach talked about it. Like Will Rogers got to a point last season where he was at the line, calling plays, calling audibles, things of that nature. And for Mike Leach to give someone the reins to do that, that means he has a lot of trust in that quarterback. And he usually doesn't have guys as young as Will Rogers. And he kept saying last season, like, listen, like, I know he started a lot of games as a true freshman, so people are just used to seeing him out there. But like at the end of the day, he's only had about a season and a half's worth of starts. And I know people will be like, well, look at Bryce Young, like all this and that. He doesn't have the talent and the athleticism that a Bryce Young has. Like that, like most quarterbacks take some time to develop. They're not all Bryce Young and Trevor Lawrence's and Deshaun Watson's, right? Like they take some time to develop. And you're seeing that with Will Rogers. And he's been spoken highly of this spring. Leach has spoken highly of him. And I think it's very reasonable to put high expectations on him this season. And I think he knows that. And he puts that pressure on himself. And he talks about, kind of being a veteran now and feeling like he's been at Mississippi State for 6 or 7 years as opposed to like 3. But the expectations are there for himself. And I think it's kind of starting to build on a national stage, especially if Mississippi State can win some games early next season.
What's the biggest question mark you have exiting the spring for the defense? Because I think Zach Arnett, I didn't know hardly anything about him when Mississippi State hired him, but I think he's been tremendous. You reference it; they've really attacked the run defense. They've been that way since Zach Arnett's been there. They've had star power in the secondary, and they got that once again in Emmanuel Forbes. So, what's the biggest question mark you have for this Zach Arnett defense that they'll have to take that next step if Mississippi State's going to truly contend in the West?
Yeah, I think the safety position is the biggest thing. And what's interesting there is that in the offseason, Mississippi State did a lot of reshuffling with the coaching staff, and it put Zach Arnett in charge of coaching the safeties specifically. And that's a position that he's going to have to harp on and get fixed because, at corner, they got to develop a number 2 corner, right? Like someone's got to step up and take the place of Forbes while Forbes takes the place of Emerson, which I think they could do. And now then it just leads it to the safety position. And, Jalen Green came over from Texas last season. He was a corner at Texas, moved to safety, and he did a pretty good job. So now you got to look at who's going to step up behind him. Obviously they have, Colin Duncan, who's a super experienced guy. But you never have really seen that kind of next step in his game. He really kind of needs to take that next step and be a leader and kind of put his foot down at the safety position, be like, hey, I can be a guy who can be trusted back here. And I'm not sure if we saw that yet this spring from him, and that's kind of hard to gauge, in practices. But even in those scrimmages, you're still kind of waiting for him to make that big play. And what's interesting there is that they bring in Jackie Matthews, a transfer from West Virginia, I believe it was, who had a pick 6 at one of the scrimmages and has looked pretty flashy in some of those spots. So it'll be interesting to see if he develops in a guy and maybe steals some snaps from Colin Duncan. And then kind of in that, I put it in the safety category, that bulldog, that position that they have. I think some schools call it like a husky. Like there's various names that I've heard for it, but they're losing Fred Peters at that position. It looks like Sean Preston Jr. is going to be the guy, at least for right now, who they want to step in there. That's another guy, kind of like Colin Duncan, where he's got experience, but like you're waiting, like you want that next step to come, and it just kind of seems like it hasn't yet. So that those 2 guys, Colin Duncan, Sean Preston, and their positions, I think are still biggest question marks, at least defensively, coming out of the spring.
Now, unfortunately, I mean, this is just the state of college football. We always got to talk transfer portal and who's coming and who's going. So I know Mississippi State's added a couple guys, but if they were to add, 1 or 2 more, what position groups do you think they will target to bring someone in to shore up any deficiencies they have?
Yeah, I think, and Mike Lee just talked about it. At least he did during one of the signing days. It's so confusing now with all the signing days to which one's which. But he talked a lot about how the thing with the portal is you don't really stop once spring starts, right? Like the portal is about to take like another push right now that spring ball is finishing, and teams know kind of what they need or have at least a little bit of a better picture of it. I think offensive line is still going to be a spot where Mississippi State's going to look to add depth, and who knows, maybe even go get someone who's solidified at left tackle. If there's a big name out there, you can look at Percy Lewis, the JUCO guy coming in, and you can look at Patrevius Johnson and the work he's putting over there and say, listen, you guys are great and we'll develop you, but this guy's immediate and we got a chance at him. We're going to bring him in and put him there. So I think that's one thing to watch out. It could be really at either of the tackle positions, because right tackle is not really solidified either with Scott Lashley out of eligibility there. And then defensively, I think we're going to see some more additions in the secondary. And I'm totally slipping on his name right now, but they just got a former 4-star defensive back coming in from Florida State, the other day who committed, and
Marcus Washington.
Right, you're right. So they're bringing in Washington, and so they've got good pieces there right now. But I think what they need, as I mentioned it with Colin Duncan and Sean Preston and Emmanuel Forbes probably leaving for the NFL next year, like they've got really good pieces right now. But you look at that group and you're like, that's kind of an old group with not a lot of young guys who are ready to step in. So they needed a guy like that to come in from Florida State and give them 3 or 4 years of eligibility to maybe not make an immediate impact, but give them some kind of foundation in the secondary for the years moving forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and got a couple more guys like that who, were highly rated players out of high school, maybe just didn't fit, at their current schools, things like that. Bring them in, tell them, hey, you're probably not going to play this year or not play much this year. Let us develop you. And then when Forbes and Duncan and Preston are gone and even Jalen Green, you'll be ready to step in next season. So looking at that would be the 2023 season.
All right, last question for you. I really appreciate all your time. Mike Leach, unfortunately, hey, the guy he replaced was undefeated in the Egg Bowl. Mike Leach is still searching for his first Egg Bowl. I'm not trying to push Leach out the door because I love him. I hope he's in the SEC forever. But how much pressure is going to be on Mike Leach to win that Egg Bowl, even though it is in Oxford this year?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of pressure, and I think there's a lot of pressure because people don't know what Ole Miss is going to look like, right? Like, how do they look replacing a ton of key players who are leaving for the NFL? Like, I don't think the expectations are that high, at least nationally, on Ole Miss, and that's going to push for people believing, hey, this is the year that you got to go in there and you got to steal a win on the road and bring the Egg Bowl back to Starkville. And there's pressure, and I've had this discussion a million times with various people of like, how do you balance what was a really good season last year for Mississippi State and a huge step forward in year 2 under Mike Leach? How do you balance that with losing the Egg Bowl again? And there's a lot of people who are like, listen, if he loses it this year, he's on the hot seat. Like, and I was like, even if he wins like 11, like if he goes 11-1 and loses to Ole Miss, they're like, yeah, you can't go 0-3 in the Egg Bowl and be safe around here. So that's, I mean, it's whether you think it's right or wrong, it's how a lot of people think, right? Like, there's a lot of Thanksgivings that people get together, and part of the family's an Ole Miss fan, and part of the family's a State fan, and it determines how that Thanksgiving night goes. So there's pressure, and Leach probably knows it, and he probably he won't talk about it. He'll say he's worried about consistency and taking it one game at a time. And when Ole Miss comes around, it'll be about winning a football game and not about winning some huge Egg Bowl. But he knows, and people around Mississippi State know that if you start off 0-3 in the Egg Bowl, you better be winning 11 games because otherwise people get mad and what comes with that.
All right, so he's Stefan Krajisnik. I hope I nailed that.
Krajisnik, close enough. You had the first time, so that's all we asked for.
I really, really appreciate all this Mississippi State knowledge and for you taking this time. You did an outstanding job. I think my listeners are really, really going to appreciate this one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, and anytime you want me on, in the summer and the season, let me know, man. I got time for you.
All right, so just want to say thanks to Stefan for joining the show. Some outstanding coverage here on the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I hope you Bulldog fans, I keep hearing it. Hell, I hear it from every fan base, Shane, but Mississippi State fans are definitely there. Give us more coverage of Mississippi State, so I hope you appreciated that. I have 2 other guests lined up for the next episode, so hey, we got plenty of coverage coming your way before the NFL draft, and of course, we'll have something special planned for that. But you got anything before we get out of here, brother?
Man, how did we not mention the Florida hat toss? I mean, come on, Mike. For how many years has a Tennessee hat or a Tennessee shirt been ripped and all this? Usually we are the butt of the joke when it comes to recruiting. And I know we haven't talked that much about recruiting, but man, it was nice not seeing a Tennessee hat flung in the audience, wasn't it?
Yeah, if anybody doesn't know what Shane's talking about, 4-star safety Sylvester Smith, number 11 safety prospect in the country, committed to Tennessee on Tuesday. The Vols, Shane, number 7 recruiting class in the country right now. It's a tremendous job by Josh Heupel and company, but he picked up that Florida hat, probably gave Heupel a little bit of a heart attack before he threw it, like you said, and he and the family revealed all their Tennessee gear. So, yeah, it's got to feel nice to be on the other end of that one, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, I just had to bring that up because, like I said, I've seen everything else. I've seen jerseys ripped and parents mad at the kids. It's nice to see something go our way for once. But No, brother, that's all I've got.
Well,
Fantastic.
hey, Shane, let me say this, though.
Yeah.
You want to – there's that, and then if you've seen it, the baseball team apparently, broke into the Florida locker room, was wearing all the Florida helmets. I mean, my goodness, Tennessee's – they're asking for trouble with the damn – the jinx of the Gators coming to town this year, aren't they?
No, they're not. And I'm going to tell you why, Mike, because this is a rivalry that kind of went away for a little bit, and I feel like it's heating back up. So yeah. I love it. Florida wants us. We want Florida. So it's shaping up. It's going to be a hell of a matchup, and this is what it's all about, brother. I mean, all season, already taking – I mean, we got the baseball team sneaking in the locker room wearing those helmets. Now, I did see a lot of people saying – a lot of Gator fans saying they were just living their dream, since they didn't get a scholarship offer. So they trust me, they threw it back at us. But no, I love it, man. This is what it's all about, and I'm ready for college football. We were just talking just a few hours ago about we're right around the corner from the 100-day countdown, and it feels like when we start that 100-day countdown, college football's cranking up sooner than later. So. About a month away, brother.
Yeah, I can't wait for it, Shane. So I appreciate you as always. I cannot wait to get down to this countdown. Like you said, we're about, as of this podcast, 129 days, college football kicking off. But, man, we could sit here and talk about it for hours, I feel like. But I got to let you go, get you in some quality time with the family. But I do appreciate it, as always, Shane. And I appreciate each and every one of you that keeps tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right. See you guys. Go Vols.
You need any help pronouncing my name or anything like that?
Yeah, that'd be what I was going to do. What I do is I just go fast. That way you can't correct me, but yeah, go for it.
It's Stefan Krajisnik.
Krajisnik.
Yep.
Okay. Stefan Krajisnik.
Yep.
Okay. See, I told you if I go fast, people won't even notice, all right?
You're good.